Hi everyone, I'm McNeilly Smith. I'm from the University of Sunshine Coast, so I'm a PhD candidate at the university there. Before I get into things, I'm coming from Meridian, Brisbane, which is on Tribal and Yarra land. I just want to acknowledge the custodians of the land on which we're gathering on this week, the Badigal people, and extend my respects to the elders and ancestors, past and present. Sovereignty of these lands has never been ceded. I also want to recognise that the subject matter that I'll be discussing, bioclimatic design, is not a new concept. It's something that the first peoples of this continent they've been designing with the local climate and with local landscapes for millennia. Some background to what I'm going to be talking about. So I'm talking about my PhD project, and it's one part of the project. It's the first half. What this project is looking to do is investigate the development of bioclimatic design policy for urban design and town planning purposes. So we know that planning and designing for urban heat mitigation is complex. I think that's been alluded to in this session today already, and was alluded to during the keynote this morning. There's an array of factors that we need to be considering. Things like governance, legislation, the different actors involved, what climate change looks like and how that changes the way we need to work, and how we can actually see those outcomes delivered on the ground. We need to be identifying and understanding the potential leverage points in our urban systems to design and deliver fit-for-purpose urban cooling outcomes. So that's critical. So because of this complexity, with this project, we're approaching that challenge by using sociotechnical systems methods. So STS, or sociotechnical systems methods, provide ways to consider multiple perspectives, inputs, outputs from a range of decision makers. So consideration of that array of attributes is something that planning has struggled with. So with these methods, we're hoping to bring reduce the siloed nature that often occurs when working in this space and look at these things more holistically. So historically, STS methods have been used in safety critical domains like defence, disaster management, and aviation. So we're applying STS methods in an urban context and in an urban governance context, and that's still an emergent field. If we view cities and their associated processes through the lens of complex systems and socio-technical systems methods, it provides means to understand the subjects of our investigation in a much more holistic manner, rather than siloing off different aspects of what we're looking at. So the method that we're using for this project is cognitive work analysis, and that's we're using the first phase we're using cognitive work analysis, and then within that we're using the first phase of that process, which is work domain analysis. And that has been particularly useful for describing complex urban systems. So CWA, which is illustrated there in that diagram on the slide, so that encompasses the whole method, and then we're using WDA, which is the first piece of that process. But CWA as a whole is a systems analysis and design framework that is used to identify the constraints imposed on activities, and then to design new systems that better support the activities of interest. So the work domain aspect of that, so WDA provides us with a simple but sophisticated representation of complexity in the systems that we're investigating. So it provides the ability to ask these what, why, how questions of the elements in the system. And when we're developing the model, we're developing the model in an ideal sense. So we can ask those what, why, how questions. So you can somewhat see there. We can go up the model and ask if there's the middle layer being the purpose-related functions. They're the functions that we know the system needs to perform. We can go up and ask why do we care about those functions. We can go down and ask how they're achieved. So what are the objects we need to achieve them. So the system that we're developing a model of is bioclimatic design, or rather bioclimatic urbanism. So that bioclimatic design applied in that urban design and town planning context. And so bioclimatic design, that quote there, being bioclimatic design is an approach to the design of buildings and landscape that is based on local climate and that's responsive to thermal comfort and health. So by applying these principles to the urban spaces, so we're applying these principles to the urban spaces through planning and urban design, as I've already mentioned. So the scope of the system model is factors of bioclimatic design that have a direct influence on bioclimatic design outcomes and bioclimatic functions. So they're those factors related to the environment, those environmental parameters: airflow, air temperature, radiant temperature, and humidity. That's the entire draft model, and I'm not going to go into it like this. I'll come back to it in a moment. But you can see there's 141 nodes in the model, so they're those individual nodes across each of the 5 levels of the abstraction hierarchy. And then there's over 1,000 means ends links, so they're the links between the levels of the abstraction hierarchy. But I've just got that there to demonstrate how large it is, but I'll come to a bit of a summarized version. So to run through the structure of the abstraction hierarchy, at the top, functional purposes, that's the really high level. Okay, why do we care about the system? Why does it exist in the first place? And then we've got values and priority measures. That's how we measure the success or the functionality of the system is performing what it needs to perform. Those purpose-related functions I alluded to before. They're the functions that the system needs to perform. And then at the bottom, physical objects. They're those things we need to see on the ground, but it's not just those physical things. It's things like data, considering weather, climatic patterns. And then object-related processes. They're the processes related to those physical objects in the system. So you can see at the top, those functional purposes, we want spaces which operate comfortably, we want spaces which operate passively, and we want to be supporting energy efficiency in the urban environment. And then you can see we move down through the abstraction hierarchy. And so for values and priority measures, there's 16 nodes, that's just a selection. Same for purpose-related functions, there's 26, that's just a selection. And then for object-related processes and physical objects, we've just synthesized those into those high-level categories. But that gives you an idea of the elements that are within the model and the things we're considering. So to demonstrate how the model actually works, we can, again, ask those what, why, how questions. So, something critical to bioclimatic design is optimize and manage access to sun. So, why do we want to optimize and manage access to sun? We can go up the model. One of those reasons is to minimize human harm. And ultimately, we want to be doing that because we want to be creating spaces which are comfortable. How can we achieve that? One way is through appropriate urban morphology and thinking about the placement and orientation of buildings. So us as a research project team, we developed that draft model. And so we looked at literature and amongst ourselves from that, developed that draft model. And then earlier this month, we then did engagement with subject matter experts from the built environment profession in southeast Queensland. So we sought their input. Some of the preliminary results that have come out of that included this sort of tension between practitioners' understanding of bioclimatic design versus what bioclimatic design can actually achieve. So it comes back to what I was talking about before around the direct influence and what actually does have a direct influence on bioclimatic design. And that sort of permeates through some of those other dot points. Something that was discussed at length was those sociocultural influences on thermal comfort. They sit more within the urban comfort realm and potentially outside of the scope of bioclimatic design. I think I'll say just more broadly, if we were to consider everything that had a potential influence on bioclimatic design, the model would be much larger than it is. So we need to understand the scope. And so what we'll now do based on this feedback is actually go back to the theory and understanding what bioclimatic design is and what does have that direct impact on bioclimatic functioning and bring through what needs to come through. Some of the other things that were spoken about, cultural design vernacular, so there was, as opposed to socio-cultural influences, so that's something that probably doesn't end up in the final model that wasn't in there already. Ecological services was one that was discussed at length quite a bit too, particularly around thinking around healthy trees. Healthy trees would be a node in the model and would sit there, but potentially not in the model is those ecological services that support healthy trees. Because for us, bioclimatic design, a healthy tree has a direct influence on bioclimatic outcomes. And we're not so much concerned with those ecological services. They're important, but for the purposes of the model, they are provided through other functions. And then another one was low carbon and climate positive urban design and planning considerations. Critically important, but not necessarily within the scope of the model. But there are probably elements in the model that fulfill those functions, but they're probably not to be identified explicitly. So next steps for us, we'll be doing a validation process to actually validate the model and make sure that everything that's in there is correct and we've covered off everything we need to. So we'll re-engage with some of the subject matter experts that participated in the workshops this month, and then we'll finalise the model by the end of the year. And so what this all leads to is the second part of the PhD project, which is actually taking the model and using that to directly inform the decisions we're making in urban climate modelling software and VMAT. So this will inform a policy review to develop policy typologies that we'll then test in VMAT. So we'll have really clear line of sight between the modelling decisions we're making and the outcomes and inputs, the inputs, outputs, and the outcomes of that process. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ryan. You're slightly different in that you like a grand perspective. It's about how you might assemble all the different issues to try and resolve what? At a neighbourhood scale, at a city scale, or is it scale independent?
I think it's scale independent, but it's coming from a planning and urban design perspective, which ultimately is working across that spaces between the buildings up to the regional scale. So I think the model has the application across those scales, but for the next part of the process, we're looking at policy typologies, and that'll be focused on blocks and that sort of precinct scale to then develop typologies that develop policy.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. As being a landscape architect myself, and having experience with several projects in urban design and landscape architecture, I know that urban designers, whenever they get a design brief, they tend to use they make creative leaps based upon a repertoire, projects that they've seen before and the experience. And when I see this kind of very complicated system approach, which is actually linear thinking, I wonder to what extent that actually works with your practitioners who are actually like cloud figures. How does that go together? I cannot, if I go to if I see this, I'm like, wow. Sorry to say that. How do you do that?
I think it's. I think as a practitioner, you wouldn't necessarily have that really large model there and be going through it. I think it's a useful tool to inform decision making, and I guess the impetus for this project was some research I did as part of my honours project, which looked at planners' awareness of urban heat and how they brought that into policy. And something that came through really strongly was that planners sort of the complexity piece, hence the methods. But planners had that lower awareness of urban heat compared to the landscape architects and the urban designers and the architects. And the challenge that then arises is planners here in Australia, planners are the custodians of our planning system that all these other professionals have to feed into. And so I think part of the work with this process is almost understanding really holistically what are all the inputs in an urban design and town planning sense. And the architects and the urban designers and the landscape architects are probably leaps and bounds ahead of where the planners are. So I think it's trying to bring planners along on this journey. And I think planners, this works for us, this type of thinking. So does that answer your question?
I get a better understanding now.
Yeah, happy to chat later.
Okay, everybody, we have about 10 minutes because this session has one paper short of the other sessions. We have about 10 minutes for questions of any of the speakers. I know this man wanted to pursue something with an earlier speaker. Do you want to pick up that question now at this stage? No? Okay, Shao, can I ask